Hey, 42 here. There's something strange going on in the Amazon rainforest. Or rather, I should say, unusual markings in the soil, like these circles, and this square suggest that something strange already happened in the Amazon a long, long time ago. For all of modern civilization, humanity has shared a common belief. A belief born from a lack of evidence and downright common sense that the Amazon rainforest has never been settled by humans. The Amazon is a staggering 2.7 million square miles, covering 8 countries across South America. Not only is it gargantuan in size, it's also really dense. The vegetation here is so thick that Nicki Minaj should write a song about it. And it also packs more poison than Littlefinger's pantry. Heavy hitters such as bullet ants, poison dart frogs, and the Brazilian wandering spider infest this lush landscape. All told, it's a pretty horrible place to call home, and it's truly one of the most inhospitable places on planet Earth. So I think we can forgive the fact that since European colonization in the 15th century, Western scholars have been writing that this pristine wilderness has never been inhabited by humans. Apart from sporadic tribes of hunter-gatherers, there has never been a city or other large settlement built here, because it simply wouldn't have been feasible or even possible. But what if that assumption is wrong? And not even a little bit wrong. What if it turns out that there were millions of people living in the thick, dense heart of the Amazon rainforest? Potentially over 5 million people. What if it once hosted one of the largest, most cohesive, and well-organized settlements in human history? Now, I work long hours to put these videos together, and truthfully, sometimes I forget to eat. Mostly because preparing a nutritious breakfast or lunch is just too time-consuming. So I often turn to Huel, as it's just super handy and nutritious. Huel is a convenient, plant-based meal that tastes great. It makes it effortless to maintain and keep on track of nutritional goals. It's also really affordable and can be consumed on the go. It keeps me powered throughout the day so I can focus on creating content. Huel Black Edition makes nutrition a whole lot easier. There's no tricks, no fads, and no fuss. Just a perfectly balanced plant-based meal packed with 26 vitamins and minerals, and it's ready in 30 seconds. It also contains 40 grams of protein, which is so important because protein helps every system in your body to function. The best part is that it's a breeze to prepare. Simply add 500 milliliters of water to the Huel shaker, add 2 scoops of Huel Black Edition, and then shake for 10 seconds. And it also tastes really good. My favorite's the chocolate. So click my link in the description below to start using Huel today and get a free Huel t-shirt and shaker with your first order. And a big thanks to Huel for sponsoring this video. In the past few years, new technology has unearthed strange clues dotted around the Amazon and beneath its soil that point to exactly that. We'll explore all of these strange clues in just a moment, but first, it's important to understand the biggest reason why a large human civilization in the Amazon is such a hard truth pill to swallow, and why it stretches all working knowledge of anthropology. If you watched my recent video on the Aztecs, you'll be well aware that this part of the world has played host to some of the most remarkable and well-organized pre-modern civilizations in human history, namely the Aztecs, Inca, and Maya. The Aztecs, Inca, and Maya built cities such as Cusco and Tenochtitlan with up to 400,000 inhabitants, adorned with gilded palaces, grand temples, and pyramids. They had aqueducts, sewers, and even fountains. But these civilizations were only able to grow to such a size and achieve all this technological progress because of one common discovery that they all unlocked: farming. It's been a long-established theory that every race and cultural group in human history has had to develop and adopt large-scale agriculture as a prerequisite skill in order to transition from a nomadic hunter-gatherer lifestyle into a permanent settlement. The reasoning is pretty logical. Farming yields more food per square acre than hunting and foraging. Therefore, dense settlements can only survive by using farming as their main food source. The Inca, ruling the Andes Mountains region, had to contend with steep, rugged terrain. So they developed a novel agricultural method of terrace farming. They built thin slivers of stepped fields into the slopes of the mountains. The Aztecs did something similarly out of the box. These floating gardens were called chinampas. Due to the water below, they were highly fertile and were able to yield multiple crops each year. But, as we're about to discover, the denizens of the Amazon rainforest may have found a way to break the mold of human progress, and they might have grown into a large-scale, organized human civilization of millions of people by somehow bypassing the whole development of agriculture step altogether, something that, until very recently, anthropologists didn't think was possible. And to discover how they did it, we first need to travel back to 1542, when the first European explorer ventured into the heart of the Amazon rainforest by sailing the length of the mighty Amazon River. Francisco de Orellana was a Spanish explorer who was actually searching for a mysterious city of gold in the Andes Mountains with fellow conquistadors. But when the expedition ran out of food, he set off to find some more, and eventually chanced upon the mouth of the Amazon River. He was in a boat with a friar, Gaspar de Carvajal, who documented the entire thing, and about 50 other men. After sailing along the Amazon for a while, they realized the current was too strong to turn back, and so they just soldiered on, with no idea where the river leads or how long it is. Basically, they explored the entire thing by accident, all 4,000 miles of it. It took them a year, by the way. All along the banks of the river, Orellana witnessed large, complex human settlements, complete with roads and buildings and technologies not too dissimilar to what they knew back in Spain. Technologies that the Spanish believed these so-called savages couldn't have possibly developed themselves without European influence. In his diary, he wrote, "There was one town that stretched for 15 miles without any space from house to house, which was a marvelous thing to behold. The land is as fertile and as normal in appearance as our Spain." Remember that the Amazon rainforest is remote, smotheringly thick with vegetation, and inhospitable to human life. Yet, in 1542, Orellana was describing a city that was 15 miles long. By the way, that's the width of pretty much all of present-day central London, from Chiswick to Ilford, and right in the heart of the Amazon rainforest. Such a thought challenges everything we thought we knew about the development of modern human civilizations. The trouble was, nobody believed him, and there's a good reason for that, because nobody, well, no Westerner, laid eyes on these marvelous and improbable cities ever again. After Orellana's mission, it was quite a while until Europeans mounted another large-scale exploration of the Amazon. Almost 200 years, in fact, when Spanish, Portuguese, and other nations returned to the Amazon in the late 17th century. And when they did, what they found along the banks of the river was nothing. The Amazon was deserted. Whatever, whoever had been there before was gone. There were no London-sized cities, no roads, no buildings at all. No signs that humans had ever settled this remote part of the world. And that has been the story told ever since. Orellana's tales of mega cities in the jungle were quietly consigned to a few passages in a history book. For over 500 years, the world has fooled itself into thinking that the Amazon rainforest was never settled by humans, other than a few disparate tribes, small in their numbers. But what if there is an alternate reality? What if Orellana was telling the truth and there is a logical explanation for why, in 1542, these megacities could have existed? Then, only 100 to 200 years later, they didn't. Well, it just so happens that there is such an explanation. When Spanish conquistadors arrived in the 16th century, they brought with them a pestilence that would change the history of the Americas. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. Smallpox. Smallpox decimated the Inca and Aztec populations in the early to mid-16th century, but it would take another century before it spread south and penetrated deep into the interior of the continent. So, it stands to reason that if there were hundreds of cities collectively filled with millions of people in the Amazon at the start of the 16th century, by the end of the 17th century, just under 200 years later, smallpox would have ravaged them, potentially killing up to 90% of the population. All of this is circumstantial. No Europeans were about during this time to observe this mass die-off. But what if it were true? And what if these enormous Amazonian populations abandoned their grand jungle cities after smallpox hit? These were very superstitious people. And with so many of their friends and families dying from a mysterious illness, they might have reached a conclusion that a deity was wreaking revenge for their sins, encouraging them to abandon them entirely. That could be why, when other European explorers penetrated as deep as Arana did, they found nothing but pristine wilderness. But wouldn't there, at the very least, have been buildings left behind? Some signs of human habitation? Well, the most likely answer to that is no. In a little under 200 years, a civilization of potentially over 1 million people could have disappeared without a trace. And I'll tell you exactly why in just a moment. But first, let's jump ahead to the present day. Because new technology and scientific techniques have already filled in a lot of knowledge gaps about exactly what happened deep in the Amazon all those hundreds of years ago. In 2019, researchers flew helicopters across hundreds of square miles of the Amazon. They had LiDAR scanners attached to them that fired laser pulses down into the earth. The equipment on the helicopter then measured the time taken for each pulse to return to the sensor. In doing so, LiDAR can measure the topography of an area with an accuracy of less than 10 centimeters. When they looked at the resulting images, it blew their minds. They saw rectangular structures that looked like raised platforms, pyramids, reservoirs, and long shapes that looked like causeways and canals. A few Victorian explorers had ventured deep into the Amazon to try and find these mysterious cities, spurred on by the same legends that Arana had told upon his return, but they never found anything. And that's because these grand structures aren't visible from the ground. And even when we started to fly above the Amazon, we still had no idea that these features were there, since the dense canopy and vegetation covers them. But now LiDAR is able to penetrate the vegetation to reveal all. And they didn't just find one site with these features, they found many, and each one was interconnected to the others via long causeways and canals. Look at this image and tell me the ring road around it doesn't resemble a ring road from a modern-day city. Each interconnected city is less than an hour's walk from the next, suggesting that what we're looking at here aren't just unorganized individual settlements that sporadically sprung up from small groups of people living together, but quite the opposite. This was a very large, ordered, multi-city civilization with some kind of hierarchical leadership and administrative system. Just look at this image from a research paper. Each triangle on this map is where LiDAR has uncovered the site of an ancient Amazonian city. And most likely, there are many more yet to discover. At the start of this video, I said that no large, ordered human civilization has developed without first adopting mass agriculture. Herein lies a problem. How could the Amazon once have been home to such a civilization if they never had farming? Actually, hold on a second. How do we know they didn't have farming? Well, two reasons. Firstly, despite the bounty of vegetation covering the thousands of square miles of the Amazon, the soil quality here is really poor, way below the standard that would be required to sustain mass agriculture. And secondly, to farm the Amazon, you're going to have to cut down a few trees. Recently, we've been cutting down vast swathes of rainforest to make way for palm oil plantations and other crops like bananas, tea, and coffee. But whatever civilization lived in the Amazon pre-Columbus, they cleared almost none of it. So, what if there was another way for humans to live in large organized groups? One that doesn't require farming? Well, for a long time we thought this was impossible. After all, it's the only way Western civilization has grown so quickly and became so dominant over the past millennium. But on-the-ground research and archaeological digs in these pre-Columbian cities that the LiDAR flagged up has given us a glimpse into what could have been an alternative evolutionary path for humankind. What if, instead of farmers, Homo sapiens became gardeners? Over 12,000 years ago, the Amazon was home to megafauna, giant animals such as gomphotheres, which were similar to elephants, ungulates, which are a variety of hoofed animals, and giant sloths. We can see these depicted in these paintings from 12,600 years ago, which were discovered in Colombia. Look at the size of that creature compared to the humans. Along with the megafauna, Amazonians would have gorged on oversized fruits such as massive avocados and squash, which grew throughout the Amazon at this time. Over the next few thousand years, however, both the giant animals and giant fruits were driven to extinction due to overconsumption following the proliferation of Homo sapiens. So then, Amazonians had to find food to support their growing numbers. There were still fish in the rivers and smaller fruits on the trees, but it wasn't enough to support larger population numbers. It was precisely around this time that farming was first being developed in the Middle East and would soon take Europe by storm. But in the Amazon, they did something different, something that broke the mold of human development. They began domesticating carefully chosen plants. They would first create a small mound up to a hectare in size, and then plant shrubs that produce squash and cassava, as well as Brazil nut trees. This differed from farming in two important ways. Firstly, it wasn't a monoculture, such as maize, so the biodiversity and longevity of the ecosystem was maintained. And secondly, because these garden plots were communal, it prevented elite hierarchies from developing. We only arrived at kings and queens in Europe because there needed to exist a hierarchical structure due to large-scale farming. Who else is going to enforce the ownership of who owns which farm and who owns which turnip? But as lovely as all of this may have been, many anthropologists believe that hierarchical structures are embedded deep within Homo sapien DNA. And so, eventually, this idyllic socialist society of gardeners had to break. And sure enough, it did. You see, I've been telling you a small lie this entire video. I've been suggesting that the pre-Columbian societies that flourished in the Amazon and built these impressive cities did so without any farming. But that's not entirely true. We don't know when the population of this area started to grow exponentially, but it was probably about 2,500 years ago, because that's when they started to modify the soil. And yes, began farming. Kinda, sort of, well, let me explain. Like I mentioned, the soil in the Amazon is about as nutritious as a cardboard sandwich. It's called oxisol, it's highly acidic and leached of nutrients. But around 2,500 years ago, the indigenous Amazonians did something extraordinary. They completely transformed soil. They supercharged this nutrient-poor soil by adding to it a cocktail of charcoal, animal bones, broken pottery, compost, and other organic materials. The charcoal in particular was the secret sauce. It remains in the soil for thousands of years, and it acts like a sponge, holding onto nutrients and moisture that would otherwise wash away in the heavy rains. The result was a giant carbon sponge, teeming with microbial life. A gardener's dream. Today, we call this modified soil terra preta, Portuguese for black earth. With this new fertile soil, they could begin to grow crops like maize, beans, squash, and cassava, right in the middle of the rainforest, quicker and on a larger scale than ever before, supporting large cities of up to 100,000 residents and beyond. But unlike large-scale agriculture elsewhere, they didn't need to clear vast tracts of forest. Instead, they practiced a primitive form of agroforestry, turning the rainforest that's already there into a giant, highly productive garden. They did clear some small areas, but only where they built their grand structures, such as temples. And here's where things get really interesting. The locations of these patches of terra preta often coincide with the sites of the cities and structures revealed by LiDAR, with causeways and canals leading directly to these terra preta-based gardens. Why then, when later European explorers returned to the area in the late 17th century, did they find no signs of human habitation or megacities like Francisco de Arana did in 1542? Well, As previously discussed, we strongly suspect that disease, particularly smallpox, killed most of the population, but that doesn't explain why there were no visible ruins or great temples, pyramids, and houses. Well, the most likely explanation is that archaeological digs tell us they built their cities almost entirely from wood. Why wood? Well, high-quality stone wasn't readily available around these parts. And even if it was, they didn't have the metal tools required to work it. Also, have you seen the Amazon rainforest? If you hadn't noticed, there's quite a lot of wood. After the people left, the wooden structures simply rotted away in the humid climate. Even the earthworks became covered in thick vegetation, blending seamlessly into the landscape. By the time later explorers ventured into the heart of the Amazon, there was nothing left to see. Ariana's tales of grand cities were dismissed as fabrications, the fever dreams of a man lost in the jungle. Yet, here we are, centuries later, uncovering evidence that suggests Arana may have been telling the truth all along. So then, the Amazon, once thought to be an untouched wilderness, was in fact home to a sprawling network of interconnected cities sustained by an indigenous blend of gardening and agroforestry. These people didn't just survive in the rainforest, they thrived, developing sustainable practices that were thousands of years ahead of their time. So what does this mean for our understanding of human history? Firstly, it challenges the long-held belief that intensive agriculture is a prerequisite for the development of large complex societies. Yes, the Amazonians did develop farming, but it was of a slightly different variety. By changing the soil into terra preta, it allowed them to transform the inhospitable rainforest into a fertile garden without the need for widespread deforestation, allowing them to build vast cities without altering the ecosystem on a massive scale, something, so far as we know, they are unique in having done. It also forces us to reconsider the narrative of indigenous people as mere caretakers of untouched lands. The Amazonians were sophisticated engineers, city planners, and agriculturists. Their city was as vibrant and complex as any in Europe or Asia, yet their legacy was swallowed by the jungle and almost forgotten by history. Today, we are struggling with the plague of monoculture. Most of the world's population survives on just a handful of crops, leaving our food sources susceptible to disease and famine. Yet the solution to our very modern-day problem has already been solved by remote jungle denizens thousands of years ago. The irony is palpable. Some recent estimates suggest that the pre-Columbian Amazon could have been home to over 5 million inhabitants. Just think about how crazy that is. We don't know when their population apexed, but it would be 1,000 to 2,000 years later when London reached a population of 1 million in 1801. And that really makes you think. If we're just learning about all of this in the past decade, how can we confidently say that such grand settlements haven't been built that are older than even those in the Amazon, ancient Egypt, and Mesopotamia? Who knows what civilizations came before us? The truth is, our history of humanity is still incredibly spotty, and we might have been building buildings, making laws, and fighting wars for much, much longer than any of us knows. Thanks for watching. Just a quick word to say that I couldn't make these videos without the support of my Patreon members. Consider joining the exclusive 42 Discord community by supporting me on Patreon. It's a great place to discuss my videos with like-minded individuals and myself. The link's in the description, but if you don't want to, or you can't join my Patreon, then please don't worry. A simple like or comment to say thanks would also put a huge smile on my face. Thank you.